Once upon a time, there were two little girls named Deb. One little girl grew up to be a preacher while the other grew up to be a pagan, and they both grew up to be the very best of friends. Join the preacher and the pagan as they take a fresh look at Christianity, from the inside out and the outside in.
Welcome to The Preacher and the Pagan. I'm Deb Bodwin from the U.S. and
I'm Deb Sutter from Canada.
How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing grand, but I got to tell you, when we were doing the podcast last week, I goofed and I got my East and my West mixed up. I've been living with that.
And so have I, my friend. So have I. I think you have not failed to mention that every single time we chatted.
It's kind of big. So it was the West that crumbled, not the East. The East had another 1,000 years in them. So I just want that recorded for posterity because I do know when I goof, I own it.
And the people of Constantinople have hated you silently for 1,500 years.
What can I say?
You know what? It's okay. We all make mistakes and we own them. And that is part of the growth experience. I am proud of you, Sud. I'm really proud of you.
Oh, well, thank you, Deb.
You're very welcome.
Are we going to go to hell or what?
Oh, gee, really gollies. Yes. Last time we said there needed to be a whole episode about hell. And by golly, we're going to give our listeners hell.
That's right. HE double hockey sticks.
Oh, that's a Canadian. Eh?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I thought you'd like that one.
I did very much so. Now, I live in Phoenix, and it is right now the end of June, where it's about 100-something degrees in the shade. That's about 50 degrees centigrade. So I am very familiar with the concept of hell. But I'm going to ask you, the resident expert, what exactly is hell, my friend?
Okay, fair enough. And I come from the land where it was actually 10 degrees a couple of days going on, and that is Celsius. So whole different perspective on how the heat works for us.
Yes.
Okay. So hell is it's something that I've actually had to do work on in the last couple of years because I was raised in a Christian denomination that didn't talk about it. So I want to kind of punch holes in a couple of assumptions. And one is that all of Christianity is obsessed with hell. It isn't. It's a very select group of people, mostly evangelicals and Roman Catholics. The rest tend not to be. Doesn't mean it doesn't come up, but it's not a primary focus. So that was kind of the first thing I wanted to mention. As we approach hell, I want people to kind of envision it as like this tapestry with a whole lot of different strings going on, because it's not one concept. It's a whole lot of ancient concepts that kind of merge together to create what we, in modern assumption, think of as hell. The first is Sheol, which was a resting place, a place of the dead in the Hebrew culture. Then, of course, we've got the Greek culture of Hades melded in there, but also just basic geography. Just south of Jerusalem in ancient times, there was a place where they used to do human sacrifices. And Judaism, of course, was very much against human sacrifices. That's kind of where we get the story of Abraham, by the way. It's not that he was going to sacrifice his son, but that the Hebrew God said, don't do that, when all the other cultures around were doing it. So we had this place of human sacrifice that over time became the town dump, and it was known as Gehenna. And the fires were ever burning. And much like we see in pictures today of some of the poorest parts in the world, where people climb through garbage to get their basic meals or their goods or whatever, that was the kind of the world that Gehenna was, that the poorest of the poor who had no hope of anything were kind of left living in that part of town, scrambling through garbage to get their basics needed. And these are people who had no family to take care of them. They could have been ill, all sorts of stuff. So it was also a metaphor for absolute desolation in this lifetime. So it's a few things going on there when we talk about biblical hell. And then we have the entire understanding of apocryphal literature. Apocryphal literature was kind of like a genre of literature, kind of like science fiction is today. It was a way for really oppressed people, which is what the Hebrews were at the time, to find places of hope, that their vengeance was really big in the society. So if they could find options of hope where their enemies were eternally punished, that really looked good for them. So that kind of gets melded in. So it's a whole hodgepodge of things. It is not something that was created by the early church that we have carried off whole throughout the centuries.
So I'm going to ask you right straight out, because I was raised Roman Catholic, so obviously I've never actually read the Bible. Does the Bible actually mention hell per se? Because didn't Jesus descend into hell? What was he doing there if not to save the damned? Well,
and there is Orthodox artwork that has Jesus walking out of hell, holding the hands of people, coming behind him. There's quite a bit of that. Yes, hell is mentioned. It's a place of rest. It is not a place of eternal punishment. It's a place of waiting for what the new world is going to be, because not everybody in the Hebrew culture believed in an afterlife. The Sadducees did not. The Pharisees were open to it. Obviously, the Jesus cult was very much in believing that there was. So this idea of a resting place, and this place where people went, almost to be purified, kind of like a blacksmith or a coppersmith. You know, you're working with materials and you need to burn off the edges. So you put them in the fire and then they're shined off. The essence is not destroyed, but just the picks and bubbles. So that was kind of one of the images as well, that hell was this place where you kind of got renewed and cleansed and
cremated.
And things that, pardon me?
Cremated.
No, not cremated. You were cleaned. You were, the things that you needed to work on got worked on.
Okay.
In a big way. Yeah. And of course, this was language before, the psychological and mental health world that we have today. So this concept that there are things in you that needed to be removed so that you could be a pure version of you. So that's how hell is mentioned in the majority. And then we get to the book of Revelations, which is an apocryphal genre. And that's a whole other visual of nasty things happening to the enemy. And that was aimed at the Roman government. All the underhanded sideswipe comments were aimed at the evil that was the Roman government and its influence and all the collaborators. And they're the ones who were going to ultimately be destroyed in the big fires, not the pure followers.
So hell is a resting place. So you would say it's not the opposite of heaven or something like that? Well,
again, the whole tapestry thing, that there's all these different threads of what hell was. So people had different versions. Some of them had it as a resting place. Some of it had it as a purification place. Some of it had it as a separation place from God. Some of it didn't. Some people didn't even have it as a concept at all. The separation, that's really Greek. I mean, the three-tiered universe, we get that from Olympus, Earth, and Hades. That's Greek thought. It wasn't part of Hebrew thought. And there's a awkward melding of the two as we look at the Christian scriptures.
Okay, so different people believe different things about hell and the afterlife. Let's go to the big bugaboo. What is the devil? Is he actually in the Bible? And is he sitting there with a pitchfork waiting to poke my butt?
No.
I didn't
That's
think
the
so.
short answer.
The
long answer is a little more complicated and involves history. It's all history. When the Hebrew people, the elites from Judea, were in exile in Babylon, they came across this concept in Babylonian mythology of the tempter. And they brought that concept into their emerging Hebrew tradition, because the folks in Babylon, in exile in Babylon, the priestly group of people really developed a theology at that time that hadn't really been developed as much before. And they brought this character known as Ha-Satan. Ha is the in Hebrew, and Satan means tempter. And then they wrote it back into some of the Hebrew culture. So it comes up in Job, and it comes up in Exodus, maybe. I can't remember what some of the other books it comes up in, but it's just a sporadic glimpse. And then it comes up again after the baptismal stories in the Gospels of Jesus, that he goes into the wilderness and he's tempted. And this character arrives and he tempts Jesus in 3 different areas. You know, you have your personal power, your political power, your spiritual power. And Jesus withstands that temptation and then comes back and starts his ministry. And that's in all 3 synoptic gospels. So we see the tempter in, and comes up again with Peter, when Jesus announces to everybody that I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to be dead by the end of this. And Peter says, no, that can't happen. And Jesus turns to him and says, get behind me, Satan, get behind me, temptation. But translators have taken that as a name as opposed to a description. So that's where we get the name Satan. And then it gets caught up in the idea of diablos and a few other words that come through us through Latin and Greek. So yes, Satan is in the Bible. Hasatan is in the Bible. The evil one is in the Bible, but not as a guy with a tail and pitchforks and coming after you. That doesn't exist. Okay. That's actually medieval art.
You know, you just add 2,000 years to the mix and it just all gets convoluted.
Well, right. I mean, look at today's science fiction TV shows. They absolutely love the concept of evil and hell and demons and angels. And I mean, you can't watch Supernatural or some of the others without seeing all of this stuff come to play. It is graphically fantastic. It is story worthy. It's theological garbage, but it's got great storytelling to it. So, you know, artists picked up on this stuff and it was really, really fun. And then you get enough plagues and enough people trying to understand why sickness happens. And you get a whole culture of this nasty other person trying to destroy us and God's trying to save us. So, I mean, there's logic behind it, but it is not stories that Jesus taught us.
And as somebody who grew up in one of those religions that did really believe in hell, and I've lived in areas, particularly when I was in the Bible Belt, when I was living in Kentucky, where, hell was a big old thing. Mm-hmm. How do you reach the people who have totally bought this idea that if you do not toe the line, there is infinite torture awaiting you at the end of your life? How do you offer comfort to these people? Because if there really is nothing in the Bible that says, and contextually that says this is going to happen, but they've been convinced, how do you unconvince people?
Wow. Well, it goes back to our conversation last time about converting someone. You can't convince people who are not open to something new. That's kind of number one. But I think we've just got to talk about the fact that hell, as it is often used, Satan as it's often used today, is a control mechanism. It's kind of like Grimm's fairy tales back in Germany, where anybody who's done literary work, I mean, you've done this, mm-hmm. that we knew the fairy tales were designed to scare children to stay out of the woods for their own safety. Well, it was the same kind of mentality. When the church created this whole demonology, it was to scare people into good behavior, because we're talking people who were not that literate. Well, we're not in that situation anymore, but the people who were in charge like power, and they like to be in control of the information. And right now, and the question I'd ask for a lot of people, quite honestly, is who defines hell for you? And how do they benefit by you believing it?
Exactly. Who benefits from the concept of hell? Yeah. That is one of the big questions I have really struggled with in my journey. It's like, because, I'm 55 years old and I have not been an active Catholic since I was maybe 17. And I still struggle once in a very blue moon with this idea of, what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
What if I'm wrong? What if they're right? What if the whole idea that being an out lesbian, being liberal, being pro-choice, that whole 9 yards, what if that's going to earn me an eternity of damnation?
Yeah.
And those are very challenging moments for me. It's just an example of how deep and these tendrils go into your psyche when you're raised with this sort of thing from birth.
Yeah. And it's trauma. It's horrendous. And those of us who are not raised with that have a very different approach to Christianity than those who were. And all I can really offer is go back to the Gospels, keep going back to the Gospels, go spend time on the Sermon on the Mount, go spend time with Jesus' various teachings. He doesn't talk about this stuff. He doesn't talk about lifestyles of and romance and love or abortion or any of those things. He'll talk a whole lot about the rich and powerful, though. He will talk a whole lot about how we've got to have economic justice, how people deserve to have health and wholeness, how they deserve to eat, how they deserve to be in a safe place. And for those of us who were not raised worrying about this hell business, we've spent a whole lot more time focusing on the things we're not doing enough of, rather than the personal sense that we're not enough as individuals. And I think that's one of the great crimes of the obsession about hell and Satan and sin is it's very individualized. So you will spend your entire life, am I saved? Am I going someplace? It's a fantastic way of getting you so distracted that you won't see the work that needs to be done on the ground to make sure the people around you have their basic needs met. If you're obsessed with going to hell, how much time do you have left over to be thinking about a loving God?
Exactly. And how do we okay, so we can't convert people who have totally hook, line, and sinker to it.
No.
And I don't think that's really our audience. I don't think anybody who has truly internalized this and is comfortable with this view of Christianity is going to be drawn to our podcast.
Oh no, they decided we were heretics last time.
Oh yes, we were. But I think for the Christians who are struggling, and for the former Christians like me who are still trying to reconcile their education and some of the damage that was done with what we understand to be the actual message of the, I hate to say character Jesus in the Bible, but Jesus, there's such a cognitive disconnect between what Jesus was and what we were taught. How do we help people who are struggling with that? Because I had to figure it out on my own. And I would much prefer for anyone listening to this who is struggling with that, not to have to go through 10 years of angst.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've talked about this. I'm hoping that some of this podcast will encourage people to open up, maybe ask questions, maybe even bring it to us or someone else that they can trust. I think really, and talking with you and talking with others, I think one of the things I really want to point out is that your base instinct, most people's base instinct that there's something off here, like honor that, follow that, because most people feel there's something really wrong, but they just don't know where to ask their questions or where to look to see what they've been told is incongruous. And, you should always get really suspicious when people say, well, don't read the Bible, just trust me with what I'm telling you. If you read the Gospels, actually there's a study done a number of years ago that if you read the Gospels, you actually end up being more social, more pro-social, more pro-people, more liberal in a lot of your approaches, because you start to realize that all of this doom and gloom and hate and isolation and self-obsession about salvation is all butkus. There's nothing there that Jesus talked about. And it gives us an opportunity to hopefully kind of chip away at some of the garbage that people have been told over the years. I mean, I was at the church I work in just even last week, and I was talking with someone and said, you should come along. And I mean, this is Canada, right? So I said, you should come along. And this guy who was raised in the same denomination I was looked at me and he said, so a little hellfire and brimstone? It's like, no, we don't do that. But it's so culturally encouraged that this is what Christians are all about, that it's really, really rough for people to look at their base instinct and say, there's something off here, and I got to follow my instinct about this.
You know, you bring up a really, really good point about instinct. A lot of the reading I have done is about how children are systematically, they're born knowing. They're born knowing. They know.
Yeah.
And the process of socializing children is the same you use for socializing animals. You teach them not to trust their instincts. You teach them to trust the authority. Someone else is always the authority. And it seems to me that these more restrictive denominations are simply maintaining that power dynamic that we are the children, do not trust your instincts. We don't know what's good for us. Trust the authority. And the process of going through that is almost like a form of spiritual maturation, where you're no longer going to be a child who is told what their faith is, but you're going to choose your own faith. And a lot of people would see that as a form of arrogance, but it's a journey that a lot of us have to go through.
Well, I mean, the thing I have to point out is, like, a lot of these churches, you're encouraged to call the authorities mother, father. You know, there is a desire to keep people as infants. So, I mean, look at how many denominations where you're encouraged to call the leadership mother and father. I mean, there is a real sense of keeping people in the pews at a childlike state. I refer to kindergarten theology. You're not expected to learn anything more than you did when you were 5 or 6 years old. And I rebel against that big time, because you can't have decent maturation. You can't have good conversations if people aren't allowed to explore their thoughts on all of this. And again, Jesus never told anybody to check your brains at the door. Jesus did not come to start an organized religion. He came to revolutionize the one he was born into. So he was not about kowtowing to the authority thinkers and treating them like they had all the answers. In fact, many times he'd look at them and say, what the heck is wrong with you? Like, do you not get this stuff? He said that repeatedly to the authorities. And I think that's something that we kind of have to reclaim, like challenging those around us. Like, why are you talking about this? This is so not the way things should be. And now with the internet, we can tap into worship all over the world, that people are going to give you a fuller showing of what the gospel is about and not obsess about punishment, because that is such a small part of any of this.
And it's funny because you point out the internet. A lot of the reason this control has held firm for so many centuries is because most people never went more than 5 miles from the place they were born during their life.
Yep.
For hundreds of years. You know, the only people you interacted with were your family and usually your preacher and the congregation. So you didn't have a lot of opportunities to hear opposing views or alternative views.
No. And down through history, priests were not always well educated.
Fair enough. They were usually the second sons of the nobility who just basically got shunted off because they're not going to inherit anything. You were talking about the internet, and a lot of the conversation that Kat and I have had in the past regarding certain people in power's desire to control the internet. There's reason that they don't want us talking to each other.
Yeah. Yep.
The more people talk, the more people share their stories, the more people tell their truths, the more understanding there is. And the harder it is for the people in power to make one people the angels and other people the demons. Because it's really hard to think someone's a demon when you see, you know, them doing the same thing every day that you do, getting up, going to school, going to work, whatever, loving their family, whatever that family looks like. So it's got to be much harder. If I didn't want to smack them so hard, I would feel almost sorry for these people who are trying to keep their iron grip on the souls of humanity. But it must be so much harder for them now that we're talking to each other.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think that's some of the extremism that we're seeing. I remember I mentioned last time that Christianity itself goes through a corrective every 500 years. And part of that corrective was breaking the stronghold of those who were in power. And the results, I don't know what it's going to look like this time around, but the results have always been that the people have demanded more. They want more information. They want more involvement. They want more ability to express their own spirituality. They want more opportunities to celebrate. It's always people having more. And just like in government, no one is going to give you more just because they're nice. You've got to work for it. And somewhere along the way, people in faith have been convinced that they should be grateful for pittance, or conversely, that faith is just absolute garbage. Religion's garbage. I won't have nothing to do with it. And I can understand those as entry-level responses, but you can't stay there, or else you end up being really, really bitter. You've got to kind of move along and say, you know what, this was horrible, but this I can hold on to and do something with. It doesn't mean that anybody has to come back to the church or find a nice, comfortable role in it, because I don't think anybody should be comfortable in Christianity ever. But at least find something where you want to have that conversation, where you want to be part of the big vision that we hear about in the Gospels.
And in my personal faith, I would agree with you that no one is incarnated. No one comes into this life to be comfortable. You know, Kat and I joke about having, you know, vacation lives where you don't have too much to do and you don't have too many problems. But for the most part, you don't decide to come into a human body because you think it's going to be easy. This is not an easy life that we choose to be part of. And regardless of what your faith is, reality is being human is hard. You have a lot of things to do. And if you waste all of your energy hating on the people that have harmed you since you were a child, you don't have a lot left over to actually get to the point of living. And that's one of the things when I see a lot of these former Christians and I am friends with a lot of them, and I see how strongly they're holding on to their hatred and their resentment of the church for what, and it's legitimate resentment. I mean, it's not, from the stories I'm being told, it's not pittance there, but there's a part of me that just feels so much compassion going, I know that feeling. I've had that feeling, but I know that the minute I let go of it, the minute I tried to start realizing that, you know, not everybody was the abusive, domineering faith that raised me. Not everybody in that faith was a negative person. Mm-hmm. There were people even in the most conservative Christian faiths who are true believers and who are actually really trying to live the life of that faith. But once I let go of that anger and that despair and that betrayal, that was the biggest thing, the betrayal. Mm-hmm. It was like I was free to start living again. And I wish that for all of my friends out there who are struggling with this former Christian identity, because it's just no way to live anymore, honey. It's no way to live.
Yeah. And that's really hard, because when you have been hurt that deeply, and everywhere you look, it seems like everyone is agreeing with that lifestyle. So like the media is agreeing with it. TV shows are agreeing with it. Movies are agreeing with it. Like you can't ever get away from it. The bitterness is fed on the regular. It's not like you can walk away, especially from what I understand in the United States. You can't walk away from anywhere where it talks about a version of Christianity that is not usually shared by the left side of this faith. And that's got to be hard. It's basically reinforcing all the time the simplicity that they were taught and the need to always be on the defensive.
Well, the good thing is, and I can say this as someone who lives in the United States, is that the Christian left is starting to get almost militant at this point.
Yeah.
They are getting angry. They're saying, look, this is not our faith. This is not, we're not going to let 12 people define who we are. And they're starting to speak up. And I love that has given me so much hope. Like I said, I will never be a Christian, but I have nothing against Christianity. And I am so all about Christians gathering together and saying, no, we will not be misrepresented, and we will not have our faith corrupted and used against people like this.
Yeah. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. The people who are perpetuating this are the minority. And once you kind of hunker onto that, but the majority might have a different opinion, I think it makes it a little easier to go find things like Where Are the Christian Left, which you can find on social media under that name.
The Christian Left, yes. It's wonderful. Kissing Fish.
Yeah. There's a whole lot. And these are not new. These are groups that have been around forever. But because the tensions started to rise, they're starting to get more traction now in social media. So people are becoming more aware of them. Mm-hmm. And there's huge numbers. I mean, one of my favorite is, of course, I'm going to totally blank on his name, William Barber. If you Google him, he started Moral Mondays, I think in Georgia. I'm not sure of my geography, but just listening to him, like he is a Black evangelical preacher, evangelical the way I use the word. Mm-hmm. And he's phenomenal to listen to. Hillary Clinton had him at speaking at her when she got the nomination back in 2016. He's phenomenal to listen to. Why is Pat Baker getting attention when William Barber is the one who should have the media hoarding all over him?
Pat Robinson?
Maybe.
Yeah, no, you're thinking Jim Baker.
Jim Baker. I don't know. They all kind of meshed together after a while.
Yeah. Basically, do they have a rap sheet? Yes, that's the one you're talking about.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, why does media keep paying attention to them? Like, what stupid thing have they said now that has to be blasted all over the place when you've got some amazing names? Jim Wallace is another one. Amazing people who are speaking out. Nadia, I'm so off with names. She had the Church of All Saints and All Sinners, I believe. Brilliant left thinkers who are letting people know what Christianity can look like. Mm-hmm. Like, why are they not getting media attention like they should have?
Well, that's part of what we're doing here.
That is, absolutely.
And I think what we'll do is when we actually do the show notes, and you're going to give me some links, or I know you're going to get me some names, and I will find the links because you have no Google foo at all, my friend. I love you, but you can't find your own name on the internet. So
yes, I can, and there's not very many of me.
But we'll make sure that these links are in the show notes when we're able to get that set up.
Yeah.
No, I think we've done a really good job of bringing hell into perspective, don't you?
Well, I think so. I'm always worried that I nerd out too much.
No. Nerd on, my friend. Nerd on. So we're going to be, I think we should be wrapping it up at this point. Now, where are we going next week? Are we going to the Garden of Eden? Or are we going to Mary Magdalene's hangout? I mean, what we doing? Who we debunking now?
I'm good with either.
3 hours later.
Okay, so we took a little pause to chat amongst ourselves. It seems like the perfect transition from hell is to go to where it all started, where that snake rolled his way on into the Garden of Eden. So next time, Deb, get your research cap on. We're going to be looking at the Garden of Eden and all the fun stuff that entails.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So, friends, we're really, really happy you joined us today. We hope you will come back and join us again next time. I'm Deb Bodwin from the United States, and you are?
I'm Deb Suttard from Canada.
Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye.
You've been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan with Deborah Suttard and Deborah Bodwin. This podcast is a two-lady podcast production in conjunction with The Barefoot Evangelist. Our producer and sound editor is Catherine Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Deborah Bodwin. You can reach us at thepreacherandthepagan@gmail.com or by visiting our website at barefootevangelist.ca/podcast.